What if the person everyone looks down on holds the power to destroy lives with a single text message? Sometimes the help sees everything, knows everything, and remembers everything. And when the moment is right, they strike back in ways that change destinies forever. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across marble floors as Keisha Williams adjusted her black uniform for the 100th time that morning. Her dark hands smoothed the crisp white apron while her eyes swept across the grand ballroom of the Whitmore estate. Today wasn't just any day. Today was the wedding day of Victoria Whitmore, the golden daughter of the family that had employed Keisha for 3 years. 3 years of invisible servitude. 3 years of being treated like furniture with legs. 3 years of swallowing pride while polishing silver and scrubbing toilets. But today felt different. Today, Keisha carried a secret that could shatter this perfect porcelain world into a million pieces. "Keisha, where are those fresh towels?" Victoria's shrill voice echoed from the bridal suite upstairs. Even on her wedding day, Victoria couldn't manage basic politeness. The entitled blonde had never once said please or thank you in all their interactions. "Coming, Miss Victoria," Keisha called back, her voice steady despite the storm brewing in her chest. She gathered the Egyptian cotton towels, each one worth more than her weekly salary, and climbed the sweeping staircase. The Whitmore estate buzzed with controlled chaos. Wedding planners barked orders at caterers. Florists adjusted arrangements that cost more than most people's cars. The string quartet practiced in the conservatory while photographers tested their equipment. Everyone moved with purpose except Keisha, who seemed to float between worlds, visible when needed, invisible when convenient. In the bridal suite, Victoria stood before a three-way mirror, her wedding dress a cascade of silk and diamonds. Her mother, Patricia Whitmore, fussed over every detail with the intensity of a military general. Both women possessed the same sharp features and colder eyes, though Victoria had inherited an extra dose of cruelty. Finally, Victoria snapped as Keisha entered. "I swear, good help is impossible to find these days." Patricia nodded in agreement, her lips pursed in perpetual disapproval. "I told you we should have hired more staff for today. One girl can't handle everything." They spoke about Keisha as if she weren't standing 3 feet away. This wasn't new. The Whitmore family had perfected the art of treating their help like animate objects. Keisha had learned to navigate their casual cruelty, but today their words felt like sandpaper against her already frayed nerves. "The towels, girl," Victoria waved dismissively. "And then, I need you to check on the flowers downstairs. The white roses better be perfect, or I'll have someone's head." Keisha placed the towels on the vanity, her movements precise and professional. Years of practice had taught her to hide her thoughts behind a mask of compliance. But inside, her heart hammered against her ribs. The secret she carried felt like dynamite with a lit fuse. "Oh, and Keisha," Victoria added with false sweetness, "make sure you stay in the kitchen during the ceremony. We can't have the help wandering around where the guests can see you. It would be so inappropriate." The words hit their mark. Keisha's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She'd grown up in this town, attended the same schools as some of these wedding guests before poverty forced her to drop out and find work. But in Victoria's world, Keisha's skin color and economic status made her unfit to breathe the same air as the wedding party. "Of course, Miss Victoria," Keisha replied, her voice perfectly neutral. 3 years of practice had made her an expert at swallowing poison and calling it medicine. As she turned to leave, her phone buzzed in her pocket. The message that would change everything had arrived 12 hours ago, but Keisha hadn't decided when to use it. The timing had to be perfect. The impact had to be devastating. Victoria Whitmore was about to learn that sometimes the help has teeth. Downstairs, the kitchen hummed with activity. Mrs. Henderson, the head cook, directed her team with the efficiency of a 5-star restaurant. She'd been with the Whitmore family for 15 years and had seen staff come and go like seasons. But she'd grown fond of Keisha, who worked harder than anyone and never complained. You look like you're carrying the weight of the world, child, Mrs. Henderson observed, stirring a sauce that smelled like heaven. Wedding days are stressful, but this one feels different. Keisha managed a tight smile. Just want everything to be perfect. Perfect for who? Mrs. Henderson's knowing look suggested she understood more than she let on. Sometimes perfect ain't what it appears to be. Before Keisha could respond, Marcus Rivera, Victoria's fiancé, swept into the kitchen. Tall, dark-haired, and devastatingly handsome, Marcus came from old money that made the Whitmores look like nouveau riche pretenders. His family owned half the commercial real estate in the city, and his trust fund could buy and sell most small countries. Ladies, he smiled charmingly, though Keisha noticed it didn't reach his eyes. Everything smells incredible. I just wanted to thank everyone for their hard work today. This was new. In 3 years, no Whitmore had ever thanked the staff for anything. Marcus's courtesy felt like cool water in a desert of entitlement. But Keisha wasn't fooled. She knew what kind of man Marcus really was. You're very welcome, Mr. Rivera, Mrs. Henderson beamed. We're honored to be part of your special day. Marcus's gaze found Keisha, and for a moment, something flickered in his expression. Recognition? Guilt? Fear? It was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. Keisha, isn't it? His voice was carefully casual. Victoria mentioned you'd been with the family for several years. 3 years, sir. The words tasted like ash. 3 years since that night. 3 years since Marcus Rivera had shown her exactly what kind of man he really was. Well, your dedication is appreciated. He paused, studying her face. I hope you know how valued you are here. Liar. The word screamed in Keisha's mind, but her expression remained neutral. Thank you, sir. After Marcus left, Mrs. Henderson shook her head. That man's got secrets written all over his face. Mark my words, child, rich men's secrets have a way of coming out at the worst possible times. If only she knew, Keisha thought, her hand unconsciously moving to her phone. The message waited like a loaded gun. One touch of a button, and Marcus Rivera's perfect world would explode. The morning wore on with mounting intensity. Guests began arriving in expensive cars that purred up the circular driveway. Women in designer dresses and men in tailored suits filled the estate with laughter and champagne toasts. The ceremony was set for 3 o'clock, followed by dinner and dancing until midnight. Keisha moved through her duties like a ghost. She arranged flowers, directed confused relatives to bathrooms, and endured condescending smiles from people who looked through her rather than at her. But her mind wasn't on place settings or champagne flutes. It was on timing. Victoria had humiliated her one too many times. The casual racism, the deliberate cruelty, the way she made Keisha feel less than human. It had all built up over 3 years until the pressure became unbearable. But Victoria wasn't the only target. Marcus Rivera owed a debt that was long overdue for collection. At 2:30, Keisha stood in the kitchen watching through the window as guests took their seats in the garden. White chairs arranged in perfect rows faced an arch of white roses and baby's breath. The string quartet played softly while photographers captured every moment of pre-ceremony perfection. Victoria appeared at the top of the garden steps in her dress, a vision of bridal beauty. Her father, Harold Whitmore, offered his arm with paternal pride. The processional music began, and guests rose to their feet. Even from the kitchen window, Keisha could see the tears of joy on faces throughout the crowd. Marcus stood at the altar in his black tuxedo, hands clasped behind his back. He looked every inch the perfect groom. Handsome, wealthy, successful. No one looking at him would guess the darkness he carried. No one except Keisha. She pulled out her phone. The message was already composed, ready to send. Her finger hovered over the button as Victoria began her walk down the aisle. This was it, the moment of decision. 3 years of humiliation flashed through her mind like a slideshow of pain. Victoria's casual cruelties, the family's indifference to her humanity, the way they'd all conspired to make her invisible except when they needed someone to blame or abuse. But it wasn't just about Victoria. It was about Marcus, too. About what he'd done 3 years ago. About the way he'd looked at her in the kitchen this morning, hoping his secret was still safe. About the lies he'd told and the life he'd built on a foundation of deception. Victoria reached the halfway point of her walk. Her dress trailed behind her like spilled cream, and her smile blazed with triumphant happiness. She was 30 seconds away from becoming Mrs. Marcus Rivera. 30 seconds away from getting everything she'd ever wanted. Keisha's finger moved. The message sent with a soft whoosh that seemed to echo like thunder in the quiet kitchen. The phone she'd sent it to was in Marcus's jacket pocket. Now all she had to do was wait. Marcus felt his phone buzz against his chest just as Victoria reached the altar. Her radiant smile could have powered the entire estate, and the sight of her approaching in that magnificent dress should have filled him with joy. Instead, a cold dread settled in his stomach as he recognized the specific buzz pattern of a text message. He forced his expression to remain calm as Victoria's father placed her hand in his. The officiant, a family friend who'd known the Whitmores for decades, began the familiar words of the wedding ceremony. But Marcus's mind was elsewhere, focused on the phone burning like a brand against his ribs. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." The words washed over him as he squeezed Victoria's hands and tried to look like a man experiencing the happiest moment of his life. But sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool October air, and his heart hammered against his chest like a caged bird desperate for escape. Who could be texting him during his wedding ceremony? His best man had his phone. His family knew better than to interrupt. His business associates wouldn't dare. The only people with his personal number were. A terrible thought occurred to him. No, it couldn't be. After 3 years of silence, after 3 years of careful distance, after 3 years of pretending that night never happened, it was impossible. She wouldn't dare. In the presence of God and these witnesses, Victoria's eyes sparkled with unshed tears of happiness. She looked like a princess from a fairy tale, surrounded by roses and bathed in golden afternoon light. Her mother dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief while her father beamed with pride. 200 of the city's most prominent citizens watched with rapt attention, many of them dabbing at their own eyes. It was perfect, too perfect to destroy with whatever poison waited in his phone. "Do you, Marcus Antonio Rivera, take Victoria Elizabeth Whitmore to be your lawfully wedded wife?" The question hung in the air like a sword suspended by a thread. Marcus opened his mouth to say, "I do," the same words he'd practiced dozens of times. Simple words that would seal his fate and Victoria's future. Words that would unite two of the city's most powerful families and secure his position in society forever. But his phone buzzed again. This time, the sound seemed to echo across the garden like thunder. Several guests glanced around in confusion, wondering who had been rude enough to leave their phone on during the ceremony. Marcus felt his face flush with embarrassment and something much darker, pure, paralyzing fear. He started, then stopped. His tongue felt thick and useless in his mouth. Victoria's expression shifted from joy to concern, her perfect smile faltering just slightly. "Marcus?" she whispered, so quietly only he could hear. "Are you all right?" He looked at her beautiful face, at her trusting eyes, at the life they'd planned together. A life built on lies and buried secrets. A life that was about to crumble if he didn't say those two simple words. "I need a moment," he whispered back, his voice hoarse with panic. The garden fell silent except for the gentle rustle of wind through the oak trees. 200 pairs of eyes fixed on the groom who had just asked for a moment during his own wedding vows. Victoria's mother went pale, while her father's face darkened with confusion and growing anger. "So," Harold Whitmore stepped forward, his voice carefully controlled. "Is everything all right?" Marcus's hand moved involuntarily toward his jacket pocket. The phone seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, like a time bomb waiting to explode. He couldn't ignore it anymore. Whatever waited in those messages would destroy him, whether he read them now or later. At least this way, he could control the timing. "I just need," he started, then pulled out his phone with trembling hands. The first message made his blood run cold. Hello, Marcus. Remember me? Remember what you did 3 years ago? Remember what you promised to do after? I remember everything. Asterisk his legs went weak. The garden spun around him like a carnival ride, and for a moment he thought he might collapse right there at the altar. Victoria reached out to steady him, her face now etched with genuine worry. Marcus, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. A ghost. That's exactly what Keisha Williams had become to him over the past 3 years. A ghost he'd tried to forget, a mistake he'd tried to bury, a night he'd convinced himself had never happened. But ghosts, it seemed, had a way of returning at the worst possible moments. The second message was worse. I kept my promise, Marcus. I stayed quiet for 3 years while you built your perfect life with your perfect fiancé. But promises can be broken, just like you broke yours to me. Asterisk his hands shook so violently he nearly dropped the phone. Around the garden, guests began to murmur among themselves. This was supposed to be the highlight of the social season, the wedding everyone would talk about for years. Instead, it was turning into a spectacle of an entirely different kind. Marcus! Victoria's voice carried a sharp edge of panic now. What's happening? What's wrong? He looked up at her. This woman he was supposed to love, this woman whose life he was about to destroy along with his own. Victoria Elizabeth Whitmore, who'd never worked a day in her life, who'd never been denied anything she wanted, who'd never had to face the consequences of other people's actions. She was about to learn that the man she loved was not who she thought he was. A third message arrived. Look behind you, Marcus. Look at the kitchen window. Look at me. Asterisk against every instinct screaming at him to stop. Marcus turned around. His eyes found the kitchen window of the estate, and there she was. Keisha Williams stood framed in the glass, her dark face expressionless, her phone held casually in her hand. Even from this distance, he could see the determination in her posture, the way she held herself like someone who had finally found her power. Their eyes met across the garden, and 3 years of carefully maintained distance collapsed in an instant. He was transported back to that night, to the hotel room, to the promises he'd made and broken, to the choice that had haunted him ever since. Keisha raised her phone, typed something quickly, and sent another message. Tell her, Marcus, tell your perfect princess about the night 3 years ago. Tell her about the promises you made to me. Tell her about the life you stole from me. Or I will. Asterisk the phone slipped from his numb fingers and clattered to the ground. The sound echoed across the silent garden like a gunshot. Victoria stared at him in horror, her wedding bouquet trembling in her hands. Marcus, she whispered, her voice breaking. Please tell me what's happening. Harold Whitmore stepped forward, his face red with embarrassment and anger. Son, you need to pull yourself together. Right now, everyone is watching. But Marcus couldn't hear him anymore. The world had narrowed to just 2 people, himself and the woman in the kitchen window who held his destruction in her hands. 3 years ago, he'd made her a promise he'd broken the moment it became inconvenient, a promise he'd hoped she'd forgotten. But Keisha Williams had forgotten nothing. Another message arrived, and someone in the wedding party, his groomsman probably, picked up his phone and read it aloud without thinking. I'm pregnant, Marcus, and the baby is yours. Asterisk the words hit the wedding like a nuclear bomb. Victoria's bouquet fell from her hands, white roses scattering across the grass like fallen tears. Her face went through a spectrum of emotions in seconds. Confusion, disbelief, understanding, and finally, devastating betrayal. No, she whispered, shaking her head violently. No, that's not possible. Marcus, tell me that's not possible. But Marcus couldn't speak. His world had just imploded, and all he could do was stare at the woman in the kitchen window who had just destroyed everything he'd built with a few simple text messages. Patricia Whitmore let out a strangled cry and collapsed into her chair. Harold Whitmore looked like he wanted to commit murder. The wedding guests sat in stunned silence, their phones already coming out to capture and share this social catastrophe with the world. Is it true? Victoria's voice cut through the chaos like a knife. Marcus, is it true? Did you? He looked at her. This woman he'd thought he loved, this woman whose life he'd just shattered along with his own. The truth sat between them like a poisonous snake, deadly and impossible to ignore. Victoria, I can explain. He started, but the words died in his throat. How could he explain 3 years of lies? How could he explain that while she'd been planning their perfect future, he'd been hiding a past that made that future impossible? Is it true? Each word came out like a separate bullet. In the kitchen window, Keisha Williams watched the destruction she'd unleashed with cold satisfaction. For 3 years, she'd watched Marcus Rivera live his perfect life while she struggled to rebuild hers. For 3 years, she'd honored a promise that he'd broken the moment it became convenient. Well, promises worked both ways. Marcus looked at his phone, then at Victoria, then at the 200 wedding guests who were witnessing the implosion of what should have been the happiest day of his life. Yes, he whispered, the word barely audible. It's true. Victoria's face crumpled like paper in fire. The princess had just learned that her prince was not who she thought he was, and the fairy tale was over before it had even begun. The wedding of the century had just become the scandal of the decade, and it was all because a maid in the kitchen window had decided that 3 years of silence was long enough. The silence that followed Marcus's confession stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Victoria stood frozen in her wedding dress, her face a mask of shattered dreams and growing rage. The white roses scattered at her feet seemed to mock the purity and perfection this day was supposed to represent. Then she screamed. It wasn't the scream of a hurt woman or a betrayed lover. It was the primal shriek of a spoiled child whose favorite toy had been smashed beyond repair. The sound echoed across the garden, sending birds fleeing from the oak trees and making every wedding guest wince in sympathetic embarrassment. "You bastard!" she shrieked, launching herself at Marcus with claws extended. Her perfectly styled hair came loose as she attacked, her designer nails raking across his face. "How could you do this to me? How could you destroy our wedding?" Marcus stumbled backward, his hands up to protect himself from her fury. Blood welled from the scratches on his cheek, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the humiliation burning in his chest. 200 of the city's elite were watching him get mauled by his bride at their own wedding ceremony. "Victoria, please," he gasped, trying to catch her wrists. "Let me explain. It's not what you think. Not what I think." She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You knocked up another woman and lied to me for 3 years, and it's not what I think." Harold Whitmore finally recovered from his shock and rushed forward to restrain his daughter. "Victoria, stop this. You're making a scene." A scene. She whirled on her father, her wedding dress twisted around her legs. "My fiancé just announced he has a pregnant mistress at our wedding ceremony, and you're worried about a scene?" From the kitchen window, Keisha watched the chaos unfold with grim satisfaction. 3 years of swallowed pride and hidden pain had led to this moment. 3 years of watching Marcus Rivera live his perfect life while she dealt with the consequences of their one night together. 3 years of keeping her mouth shut while he built his future on the grave of hers. But the story was far from over. The pregnancy text had been a lie, a necessary one to get everyone's attention. The real truth was far more complex and far more devastating. Her phone buzzed. Marcus was trying to call her. She let it go to voicemail. Another buzz. A text this time. "Keisha, please. We need to talk. Not here. Not like this. I can explain everything." Asterisk, she typed back quickly. "You had 3 years to explain. I'm done waiting." Asterisk, in the garden. Chaos reigned supreme. Wedding guests were pulling out their phones, some calling for cars to make quick exits, others recording the drama for social media. The string quartet had stopped playing, their instruments forgotten as they gawked at the spectacle. Even the photographers had given up any pretense of discretion and were openly documenting the destruction of what should have been a fairy tale wedding. Patricia Whitmore had recovered from her initial shock and was now in full damage control mode. She grabbed the microphone from the officiant and addressed the crowd with the commanding presence of a woman who'd spent decades managing social catastrophes. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," she announced, her voice carrying across the garden with practiced authority. "Due to unexpected circumstances, today's ceremony is postponed. Please make your way to the reception area where refreshments will be served while we sort out this situation." The crowd began to murmur and move, but slowly. No one wanted to miss the next act of this unfolding drama. They'd come for a wedding and gotten a soap opera instead. This would be the story that dominated dinner parties for months to come. Marcus stood in the center of it all, his tuxedo rumpled, his face bleeding, his life in ruins. He looked toward the kitchen window again, but Keisha was gone. "Where is she?" Victoria demanded, following his gaze. "Where is this woman who destroyed my wedding? I want to see her face." Before Marcus could answer, Keisha emerged from the kitchen through the service entrance. She'd removed her apron and cap, revealing a simple black dress that somehow made her look more dignified than anyone else at this expensive disaster. She walked across the lawn with measured steps, her chin high, her dark eyes fixed on the chaos she'd created. The remaining wedding guests parted before her like the Red Sea. Some stared openly, others whispered behind their hands, but all of them recognized the power shift that had just occurred. The maid was no longer invisible. She was the center of the story now. "Victoria Whitmore," Keisha said as she approached, her voice calm and clear. "I believe you wanted to see me." Victoria turned, her face twisted with rage and humiliation. For the first time in her life, she was face to face with someone she'd always considered beneath her notice. The help, the furniture with legs, the woman who had just destroyed her perfect day. "You," Victoria spat. "You did this. You ruined everything." "I ruined nothing," Keisha replied steadily. "I simply told the truth. Something your fiancé should have done 3 years ago." 3 years ago? Victoria's voice cracked. "What happened 3 years ago?" Marcus stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "Victoria, please. Let's discuss this privately. Not here, not in front of everyone." "Oh no," Keisha interrupted, her voice carrying a new edge of steel. "Privacy is what got us into this mess. No more secrets, Marcus. No more lies. Tell her about the Rivera Foundation charity gala 3 years ago. Tell her about the hotel room. Tell her about the promises you made." The crowd pressed closer despite Patricia Whitmore's attempts to disperse them. This was better than any reality TV show, and everyone wanted to hear the details. Victoria looked between Marcus and Keisha, her face cycling through confusion, rage, and dawning horror. What promises? What hotel room? What the hell happened 3 years ago? Marcus closed his eyes, knowing that his perfect life was about to collapse completely. But Keisha wasn't waiting for him to find his courage. "I was working that gala as temporary catering staff," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the garden. "Your fiancé was there, supposedly supporting children's literacy. Very noble, very charitable, very married to his image as the perfect philanthropist." "Get to the point," Victoria snarled. "The point," Keisha continued, "is that your perfect fiancé cornered me in a hotel room that night. He was drunk, I was vulnerable, and he took advantage of both of those things." The crowd gasped collectively. This was worse than infidelity. This was predatory behavior from one of the city's most respected young men. Marcus's face went pale. "That's not it. It wasn't like that. You're making it sound like..." "Like what, Marcus?" Keisha's voice rose for the first time, 3 years of suppressed anger finally breaking through. "Like you used your power and privilege to take advantage of a young woman trying to work her way through college? Like you promised to help me with my education and then disappeared the next morning? Like you made me believe you cared about me and then treated me like I didn't exist?" Victoria stared at her fiancé with growing horror. This wasn't just infidelity. This was something much darker, much more damaging to everything she thought she knew about the man she loved. "Is that true?" she whispered. "Marcus, is that true?" He opened his mouth, but no words came. How would he explain that night? How could he make anyone understand the complexity of what had happened between him and Keisha? How could he admit that part of him had cared about her, had genuinely wanted to help her, but had been too cowardly to face the social consequences of those feelings? Answer me. Victoria screamed, grabbing his lapels and shaking him. Did you rape her? No. Marcus finally found his voice. No, it wasn't rape. It was complicated. Complicated? Keisha laughed bitterly. It was complicated for you, maybe. For me, it was simple. A powerful man made promises he had no intention of keeping to a woman he had no intention of remembering. She turned to address Victoria directly, her voice softening slightly. I'm sorry your wedding day is ruined. I truly am. But I've watched him live his perfect life for 3 years while I struggled to rebuild mine. I watched him get engaged to you, plan this beautiful wedding, build this shining reputation, all while pretending I never existed. But why now? Victoria demanded through her tears. Why today? Why at our wedding? Keisha was quiet for a long moment, considering her answer. When she spoke, her voice was sad but resolute. Because yesterday, I got a call from a lawyer. It seems Mr. Rivera here has been buying up properties in my neighborhood through shell companies. Properties that house low-income families like mine. He's been displacing poor families to build luxury condos, all while maintaining his image as a charitable philanthropist. The crowd murmured with new interest. Real estate scandal was almost as juicy as sexual impropriety. That's not true, Marcus protested weakly. Those are legitimate business investments. Legitimate. Keisha pulled out her phone and scrolled through her messages. I have emails, Marcus, documents, proof that you've been systematically destroying my community while pretending to champion social causes. The same community where I live. The same community you promised to help 3 years ago. Victoria stared at her fiancé with complete revulsion. Who are you? I don't even know who you are. Victoria, please. Marcus reached for her, but she recoiled like he was diseased. Don't touch me. Don't ever touch me again. She turned to Keisha, her voice breaking. Are you really pregnant? Keisha met her eyes steadily. No, that was a lie to get his attention. But everything else is true. Every word of it. The garden fell silent, except for the whisper of wind through the trees. The wedding that was supposed to unite two of the city's most prominent families had instead exposed the rot beneath their polished surface. Patricia Whitmore approached her daughter with careful steps, as if Victoria might shatter at any moment. Darling, let's go inside. We need to discuss this privately. Privately? Victoria's laugh was hollow and broken. Mother, our private family business just got exposed in front of half the city. I think privacy is off the table. She pulled off her engagement ring, a 5-carat diamond that caught the afternoon light like captured fire, and threw it at Marcus's feet. The wedding is off, she announced to the remaining crowd. Obviously, as she turned to walk back toward the house, her torn wedding dress trailing behind her like the remnants of a destroyed dream, she paused and looked back at Keisha. Thank you, she said quietly, for telling me the truth, even if it destroyed everything. Then, she was gone, leaving Marcus standing alone in his ruined tuxedo, surrounded by the wreckage of what should have been the happiest day of his life. But Keisha wasn't finished with him yet. Not by a long shot. The Whitmore estate transformed from a fairy tale wedding venue into a crime scene of social destruction in a matter of hours. Guests departed in expensive cars, their phones buzzing with urgent calls to friends and family who hadn't witnessed the catastrophe firsthand. The catering staff packed up untouched wedding cake, while photographers deleted the romantic shots they'd captured earlier, knowing they'd never see payment for this disaster. But Keisha Williams wasn't going anywhere. She stood in the middle of the garden, watching Marcus Rivera's world crumble around him. The man who had once seemed so powerful, so untouchable, now looked like exactly what he was, a coward who'd built his life on lies and other people's pain. We need to talk, Marcus said, approaching her with the cautious movements of a man who knew he was walking through a minefield. Alone. I think we're past private conversations, Keisha replied, gesturing to the chaos around them. Your secrets are public now. Deal with it. The remaining wedding guests clustered near the house, reluctant to leave before the final act of this drama played out. Patricia Whitmore was on her phone, probably calling lawyers or crisis management experts. Harold Whitmore paced back and forth like a caged tiger, his face purple with rage and embarrassment. "Please," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "You want to destroy me? Fine. I deserve it. But let's finish this away from them." Keisha studied his face, seeing for the first time the fear and desperation she'd dreamed of witnessing for 3 years. The powerful Marcus Rivera, reduced to begging. The philanthropist facade cracked to reveal the selfish man beneath. "The gazebo," she said finally. 5 minutes. Then, I'm calling the reporters." They walked across the lawn to the white Victorian gazebo that had been decorated with climbing roses for wedding photos that would never be taken. Marcus's hands shook as he loosened his tie, his perfect groom appearance dissolving into disheveled defeat. "What do you want?" he asked once they were alone. "Money? I'll write you a check right now. Name your price." Keisha laughed, a sound like breaking bells. "You think this is about money? You think you can buy your way out of this like you buy your way out of everything else?" "Then what?" His voice rose in frustration. "What do you want from me? I want you to understand what you did to me." Her voice was quiet now, deadly calm. "I want you to know what the last 3 years have been like while you lived your perfect life." She sat down on the gazebo steps, forcing him to look down at her. A reversal of the power dynamic that had defined their relationship 3 years ago. "I was 22 years old," she began, "working 3 jobs to pay for community college while taking care of my sick grandmother. I was tired, Marcus. Bone-deep exhausted from trying to build something better for myself with no help from anyone." Marcus shifted uncomfortably but didn't interrupt. "That night at the charity gala, you were so charming, so interested in my story. You made me feel like I mattered, like someone finally saw me as more than just a help. You talked about education being the key to breaking the cycle of poverty. You talked about helping young people like me achieve their dreams. I meant that," Marcus said weakly. "I really did want to help you." "Did you?" Keisha's eyes flashed with anger. "Is that why you invited me to your hotel room? To help me with my education?" "It wasn't like that. We talked for hours. We connected. It felt real. Real." She stood up, facing him directly. "What felt real about it, Marcus? The part where you told me you'd never met anyone like me? The part where you promised to help me transfer to a 4-year university? Or the part where you said you'd never felt this way about anyone before?" Each question hit him like a physical blow. He'd forgotten how young she'd been, how genuine her dreams had seemed, how much his promises had meant to her. "I was going through a difficult time," he said, hating how weak the excuse sounded. "My father was pressuring me to get engaged to Victoria. The family business was expanding. I was drinking too much, making poor decisions." "Poor decisions." Keisha repeated the words like they tasted bitter. "Is that what I was to you? A poor decision?" "No," he said quickly. You were beautiful. Smart. You had this light in you that I'd never seen before. You made me want to be better than I was. Then, why did you disappear?" The question hung between them like a sword. Marcus closed his eyes, remembering that morning 3 years ago when he'd woken up in his hotel room next to this incredible young woman who'd trusted him with her dreams and her body. He'd looked at her sleeping face and panicked, seeing not the connection they'd shared, but the social catastrophe that would result if anyone found out. "I was scared," he admitted. "My family, my reputation, my future with Victoria, it would have all been over if anyone knew. I was a coward." "Yes, you were." Keisha's voice was matter-of-fact, which somehow made it worse than if she'd screamed. "But that's not the worst part. The worst part is what you did after." Marcus frowned. "What do you mean? I tried to contact you. Did you know that? I called your office. I sent emails. I showed up at events where I knew you'd be, hoping to talk to you about what happened between us. I never got any calls or emails," he protested. "Because you had your assistant screen them out. Because you told your security to keep away any staff members who tried to approach you. Because you systematically erased me from your world like I never existed." The truth of it hit him like a sledgehammer. He had done those things. After that night, he'd been so terrified of the consequences that he'd built walls to keep Keisha away. He'd never considered what that might have done to her. But that's still not the worst part, Keisha continued. The worst part is what you've been doing to my community. What are you talking about? She pulled out her phone and scrolled through a series of documents. Rivera Development, LLC. Rivera Holdings Incorporated, Rivera Property Management. Should I go on? Marcus's face went pale. How did you? I'm smarter than you gave me credit for. It took me 2 years to trace all the shell companies back to you, but I figured it out. You've been buying up properties in my neighborhood for 18 months. Low-income housing, rent-controlled apartments, Section 8 buildings. That's just business. Legal business. Legal? Maybe. Ethical? Absolutely not. Her voice grew harder. You've displaced over 300 families, Marcus. 300 families who had nowhere else to go. You've torn down affordable housing to build luxury condos that nobody in the community can afford. There's nothing wrong with development, with improving neighborhoods. Improving them or destroying them? Keisha stood up, pacing now like a prosecutor making her closing argument. Mrs. Chun, who lived in that building for 40 years, had to move in with her daughter in another state. The Rodriguez family lost their apartment and had to put their kids in a different school district. The community center where I tutored kids after school, you bought that too and turned it into a boutique coffee shop. Each example hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd never thought about the individual people affected by his business decisions. They've been numbers on spreadsheets, not real families with real lives. You promised to help young people like me achieve their dreams, Keisha continued. Instead, you've been systematically destroying the community that raised me. Do you have any idea how that feels? I didn't know, he said weakly. I didn't connect you to that neighborhood. My property managers handle the details. You didn't know because you didn't want to know. You didn't care because caring would have been inconvenient. She sat back down suddenly, looking tired. The anger that had sustained her through this confrontation was giving way to exhaustion and sadness. I kept your secret for 3 years, Marcus. Even when I lost my apartment because of your developments, even when I had to drop out of school because I couldn't afford it anymore, even when I had to take this job with the Whitmores because it was the only work I could find. I kept your secret. Why? He asked softly. Because I believed in the man I met that night. I thought maybe you really were someone special, someone who would eventually do the right thing. I thought maybe if I was patient, if I waited long enough, you'd remember your promises and try to make things right. Marcus felt tears burning behind his eyes. He'd spent 3 years telling himself that night hadn't mattered, that Keisha Williams had probably forgotten him and moved on with her life. He'd never imagined she'd been watching him, waiting for him to become the man she'd believed him to be. But yesterday changed everything, Keisha said. Yesterday, I found out about your latest acquisition, the apartment building where my grandmother lived before she died, where I grew up, where I learned to dream about something better. Keisha, you bought it, Marcus. You bought my childhood home, and you're tearing it down to build more luxury condos. That was the final straw. That was when I realized you weren't ever going to become the man I thought you could be. The full weight of his actions crashed down on Marcus like a collapsing building. He saw it all now, the chain of casual cruelties and willful blindness that had led to this moment. He destroyed not just Keisha's dreams, but her entire world, all while maintaining his image as a philanthropist and charitable businessman. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't rebuild communities, Marcus. Sorry doesn't give displaced families their homes back. Sorry doesn't undo 3 years of lies and broken promises. What can I do? He asked desperately. How can I make this right? Keisha looked at him for a long moment, studying his face like she was trying to decide if he was capable of redemption. That's not for me to decide anymore, she said finally. I've done what I came here to do. I've told the truth. What happens next is up to you. She stood up and walked toward the gazebo steps, then paused and looked back at him. Your fiancé asked me why I did this today, why I chose your wedding to expose you. I told her it was about the real estate deals, and that's true, but it was also about this moment right here. What moment? The moment when Marcus Rivera finally has to face the consequences of his actions. The moment when you can't hide behind your money and your family name and your fake charitable image. The moment when you have to decide who you really are. She walked away then, leaving Marcus alone in the gazebo, surrounded by the ruins of his wedding day and his carefully constructed life. But this wasn't over. Not yet, because Keisha Williams had one more surprise waiting for him. 3 days after the wedding disaster, Marcus Rivera sat in his penthouse apartment staring at newspapers and social media feeds that had turned his life into a cautionary tale. The headlines range from merely embarrassing to utterly devastating. Wedding of the century becomes scandal of the decade. Philanthropist or predator? The Marcus Rivera story, from Prince T.O. Pariah. How one text message destroyed a dynasty. His phone had been ringing constantly with calls from reporters, lawyers, and business associates. The Rivera family stock price had dropped 15%. 3 major charitable organizations had severed ties with him. Victoria had moved back in with her parents and hired one of the city's most ruthless divorce attorneys, even though they'd never actually married. But none of that compared to the phone call he'd received an hour ago. Mr. Rivera? This is Janet Morrison from the State Attorney General's office. We'd like to speak with you about your real estate holdings and certain allegations of predatory business practices. The investigation was just beginning. Keisha's accusations had opened a floodgate of scrutiny that would examine every business deal, every property acquisition, every charitable donation he'd made over the past 5 years. His lawyers were confident they could defend him against criminal charges, but the civil lawsuits were piling up like autumn leaves. A knock at his door interrupted his brooding. His doorman had strict instructions not to let anyone up without permission. So Marcus was surprised to find Keisha Williams standing in his hallway. She looked different than she had at the wedding. Gone was the maid's uniform, replaced by a simple but elegant black pantsuit. Her hair was pulled back in a professional style, and she carried herself with the confidence of a woman who had finally claimed her power. "Hello, Marcus. May I come in?" He stepped aside, too stunned to refuse. "How did you get up here?" "I told the doorman I was here about the Rivera Foundation Scholarship Program." She smiled grimly. Technically true. His apartment was a monument to wealth and taste, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, modern art worth more than most people's houses, furniture that belonged in a museum. Keisha walked through it like she owned the place, and Marcus felt like an intruder in his own home. "Nice place," she said, settling into a leather chair that cost more than her annual salary. "Very different from the neighborhood where you grew up." Marcus frowned. "I grew up on the Upper East Side." "No," Keisha said calmly. "You grew up in Riverside Heights. Same neighborhood where I live now. Same neighborhood you've been systematically destroying." The words hit him like ice water. "That's impossible. I was born on the Upper East Side. My family has lived there for 3 generations." "Your adoptive family, yes." Keisha pulled out a manila folder and set it on his coffee table. "But your birth mother lived in a 1-bedroom apartment on Riverside Street. She was 17 when she had you. Unmarried, working as a cashier at a grocery store." Marcus stared at the folder like it might explode. "You're lying." "Am I?" Keisha opened the folder and spread out documents, birth certificates, adoption papers, hospital records. "Maria Santos. She tried to keep you for 6 months before she realized she couldn't afford to raise you alone. She wanted you to have opportunities she couldn't give you." He moved closer, his hands trembling as he picked up the birth certificate. There was in black and white, Marcus Santos, born to Maria Santos, father unknown. The signature at the bottom was shaky and young, but it was definitely real. "She gave you up to the Riveras when you were 6 months old," Keisha continued. "They were wealthy, established, looking to adopt. They changed your name, created a new birth certificate, and erased Maria Santos from your history." "How do you know this?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Because Maria Santos was my great aunt. Because I grew up hearing stories about the baby she gave away to give him a better life. Because I knew exactly who you were the first time I saw your picture in the society pages." The room spun around Marcus like a carnival ride. Everything he thought he knew about himself, about his identity, about his place in the world, was crumbling like sand castles in the tide. "That night at the charity gala," he said slowly. "You knew then?" "I suspected. But I wasn't sure until you told me your middle name was Antonio. That sealed it. Keisha's voice was steady, but he could hear the emotion underneath. My great-aunt named you Marcus Antonio Santos after her father. She used to say she hoped you'd grow up to be a good man who helped people like her. Marcus collapsed into a chair, the adoption papers scattered around him like evidence of his stolen life. Why are you telling me this now? Why didn't you say something 3 years ago? Because 3 years ago, I thought it might actually mean something to you. I thought discovering your roots might inspire you to help the community you came from. Keisha's voice hardened. Instead, I watched you systematically destroy it. You planned this, he whispered, understanding dawning on him. All of it. The job with the Whitmores, the wedding day revelation, everything. You planned it all. Not all of it. I really didn't need the work when I started at the estate. But, yes, I've been watching you for 3 years, waiting to see if you'd live up to the dreams my great-aunt had for you. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. You want to know the real tragedy in all this, Marcus? He was afraid to ask. Maria Santos died 2 years ago. She lived in one of the buildings you bought and demolished. She died in a cramped studio apartment across town, displaced from the neighborhood where she'd spent her entire life, never knowing that the son she gave up for adoption was the one who destroyed her home. The words hit him like physical blows. Marcus doubled over, his breath coming in short gasps as the full magnitude of what he'd done crashed over him. He hadn't just destroyed Keisha's community, he destroyed his own. He hadn't just displaced random families, he displaced his birth mother. She kept a picture of you, Keisha continued relentlessly, cut out from a newspaper article about your engagement to Victoria. She was so proud that the baby she gave up had become successful, even if she never got to meet you again. Stop, Marcus gasped. Please stop. She used to say she hoped you'd remember where you came from someday. She hoped you'd use your success to help people like her. Keisha turned back to him, tears glistening in her eyes. She died believing in you, Marcus. She died thinking you were the good man she dreamed you'd become. Marcus was sobbing now, great heaving sobs that shook his entire body. The weight of his actions, the magnitude of his betrayal, not just of Keisha, but of his birth mother, of his own origins, of everything he should have been, crushed him like a physical force. I didn't know, he choked out between sobs. I swear I didn't know. But you should have cared enough to find out. You should have wondered about the people you were displacing. You should have seen their faces instead of just their bank accounts. Keisha sat back down, her own composure cracking slightly. Do you want to know why I really exposed you at your wedding? Marcus looked up at her through his tears. Because Maria Santos died on the same day you sent out your wedding invitations. She died alone in that studio apartment, surrounded by pictures of the son who never knew she existed, while you celebrated your engagement to a woman who's never worked a day in her life. Her voice broke. She died, dreaming of a son who had become the very thing that killed her. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, the city hummed with life and activity, but inside Marcus's penthouse, two people sat in the ruins of dreams and lies and broken promises. What happens now? Marcus asked finally. Now you have a choice, Keisha said, wiping away her tears and regaining her composure. You can fight the investigations, hire expensive lawyers, try to salvage your reputation, and go back to business as usual. Or you can honor the woman who gave you life by finally becoming the man she believed you could be. How? You know how. You've known since the night we met what the right thing to do was. You just chose not to do it. She stood up and walked toward the door, then paused. The Rivera Foundation still exists, right? The charitable arm of your family's empire. Marcus nodded numbly. Then start there. Really start there. Not the fake charity events and tax write-offs, but real help for real people. Use your resources to rebuild what you've torn down. Give families back their homes. Fund education for kids who need it. Become the philanthropist you've been pretending to be all these years. She opened the door, then looked back at him one last time. Your birth mother named you Marcus Antonio Santos. Santos means saints in Spanish. She dreamed of raising a little saint who would help make the world better. Keisha's voice was soft now, Sad, but not unkind. It's not too late to become that person, Marcus. It's never too late to honor the dreams of the people who loved you. And then she was gone, leaving Marcus alone with the truth of who he was and the choice of who he could become. 6 months later, the headlines were different. Rivera Foundation announces $50 million housing initiative from scandal to redemption. The Marcus Rivera transformation. Local hero funds new community center in Riverside Heights. Marcus Santos Rivera. He'd legally added his birth name back. Stood in the construction site where his birth mother's apartment building had once stood. But instead of luxury condos, affordable housing was rising from the foundation. Real affordable housing with rent controls and community spaces and programs for families who needed help getting back on their feet. Keisha Williams stood beside him, no longer his accuser but his partner in rebuilding what had been destroyed. She'd accepted his offer to direct the Rivera Foundation's community outreach programs, bringing her dreams of education and empowerment full circle. She would have been proud, Keisha said, looking at the construction taking place around them. I hope so, Marcus replied. I have a lot to make up for. Yes, you do. But at least now you're making up for it. The wedding that never was had destroyed Marcus Rivera, the privileged socialite. But it had also created something new. Marcus Santos Rivera, the community builder, the real philanthropist, the man his birth mother had dreamed he could become. It had taken the complete destruction of his old life to reveal the foundation of a new one. And in the end, that destruction had been the greatest gift Keisha Williams could have given him, the gift of becoming himself.